Mike Detillier, longtime football talker, talk show host extraordinaire at WWL Radio in New Orleans, joining us on Halftime today to talk about the LSU Tigers. Mike, appreciate your time. How are you today?
I'm fine, man. We couldn't have planned this any better, right?
No kidding. No kidding. Breaking news coming out of LSU camp that a starting quarterback is going to be announced. It is Jayden McDaniels, the Arizona State transfer, and the twisting, turning career of Myles Brennan apparently coming to an end at LSU. What have you learned about the situation today, and first of all, why Brian Kelly is going with Jayden McDaniels?
Well, with Myles, I think a lot of it is frustration. I think he was told over the weekend Jayden McDaniels was going to be the starter on this football team. And, you know, Myles has had just a sort of a crazy career here. You know, he has an injury against Missouri in which he tears up part of around his hip and his groin that doctors told him they hadn't seen anything like that since automobile wrecks. And so it knocks him out. And then last year, you know, he's competing with Max, and he looked to have a bit of an advantage. And, you know, he trips over some stairs at a fishing camp and breaks his arm. And then, you know, looks as though he was going to leave LSU. He was going to transfer out and looked as though he would probably go to Nebraska. And at the final moment, Brian Kelly talks him into one more year at LSU, and just maybe a month and a half later, they bring in Jayden McDaniels. And that, to me, was the first flare that it wasn't going to be a walk-in for Myles. But the strange thing about that is for the Manning Passing Academy, because, you know, I know how Archie handles things. He does not want a quarterback controversy. And he will always go to the head coach and say, send me your starter. The guy Brian Kelly sent was Myles Brennan. So it's a little bit of a twist and a turn there. But I think for Coach Kelly, he liked Daniel's experience as a starter, his mobility skills. He does have a super talented receiving core. But of all the three quarterbacks, and I'm going to throw Garrett Nussmeier in here, too, because I thought he looked to be the most improved player offensively from a year ago in the spring. Jayden was the most erratic as a passer. But boy, he brings you an element in being able to spread the field, run the ball, do a lot of different things off the waggle. So it looks as though Brian Kelly is going to give that first shot out the barrel against Florida State, and it'll be Jayden McDaniels. And more movement quarterback. Myles was a pure pocket-style quarterback. Didn't have a lot of movement skills with him, where Daniels has the huge advantage on that end, and you do have an offensive line with a lot of new pieces on it.
Mike Detillier from WWL Radio joining us here on Halftime. Mike, you mentioned the wide receiver group for LSU. Kayshon Boutte is back after the injury from last year. You know, the conversation about Arkansas's wide receivers are, well, you got to replace the guy who was your guy from last year in Treylon Burks. LSU is getting that guy back, but the rest of the room is still very. You think that's a real position of depth?
That's the strength of this football team. I mean, Malik Neighbors, I think, has got a chance to be a super talented guy. Jack Besh, he isn't the biggest, fastest, strongest guy around, but he makes plays as a receiver. He was a former flex tight end in high school. You have Jaray Jenkins, a 6'4" wideout who has seen a lot of playing time. And you have a couple of young guys that saw a little bit of playing time a year ago. And the speedster Chris Hilton and Brian Thomas Jr., who was the most highly recruited wideout in the state of Louisiana a year ago. So LSU's got some talent at wideout. And so that is certainly from a starting standpoint and depth standpoint, the strength of their football team. No question about it. It isn't DBU, it's wide receiver U. When you look at all the receivers, this school has been able to churn out over the last 4 or 5 years. And Kayshon, he's special. and he's healthy, and, man, he's a playmaker. And I think much has been made about maybe there being a little bit of friction between Brian Kelly and Butte about his work habits and practice habits. And I always wonder a little bit when a new coach comes in that he goes after the top player and kind of a nod, wink, wink deal of, hey, look, if those other guys see me chewing your butt, then I can get on somebody else's.
Mm. Well, overall, how do you think the transition from Edo to Brian Kelly with the current returning players has gone so far? Has he done a good job? I'm guessing he probably has, being as veteran of a coach as he has, to really get everyone in the locker room to buy in.
We hadn't seen this much speed on a football team. The one thing LSU's got, they got fast players. I mean, they got a lot of speed. And he sort of has brought that up, that the speed element here is different. Now, from a size standpoint, he's got to rebuild the offensive line, but that's been his wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. That's been his spot. If you look back at Notre Dame, it's being offensive line and tight end. Those two positions have been what Notre Dame has really churned out under Brian Kelly. And he's got a couple of new transfers, but they're going to start a 18-year-old freshman left tackle in Will Campbell.
Wow.
Okay, that didn't happen with Alan Faneca, with Andrew Whitworth, with some of the other guys that have played a long time in the NFL. But it's going to happen with Will Campbell, and he won it in the spring. Brian came on with us and said, hey, he didn't win it because he was the top recruit in the state. He won it because he was the best left tackle that I had. And he's moving around some pieces across that offensive line. I think the critical spot is at center with Garrett Dellinger now being moved there. His defensive line is really good with B.J. Ojolari, Mason Smith, who has a chance to be, I think, not only an all-SEC player, but an all-American. Jaqueline Roy, I think, is a really good player, too, a defensive tackle, and Ali Gay. Ali Gay's got a chance to be really good. He's got to stay healthy. The big question mark defensively, guys, and I don't think in my 30-something years I've said this, it's at cornerback at LSU. Wow. When you think about they lost Stingley and Cardell Flott early to the NFL, and they had some business decisions that were made. Elias Ricks decided to go to Alabama. McLaughlin goes to Arkansas. And so that wiped out those top four. And so now they got a bunch of transfer guys, and we'll see how that all shakes out. But they're going to be able to get a pass rush. The big question mark is going to be at corner. And somebody asked me this the other day on a national show. Do you ever remember saying that? And I said, you know what? I can't recall it. Certainly not over the last, say, 20 years with Saban, Miles, Orgeron. That was not the question mark spot for LSU.
Yeah, it definitely isn't for a school that's known as DBU. But, Mike, this team, there's so much good things going for it, like you just talked about. But this team nationally has been picked to finish anywhere from, 6 wins to I've seen 10 and 11, like the dark horse type of thing. So instead of asking you what the ceiling is, what's the floor for this team this year? And also, how important is it that they don't have to leave the state of Louisiana until October 1st?
That's a big help early on. I think this is an 8-9 win team. Brian came on with us on WWL, and when I mentioned it to him about, what people in Vegas were saying, he said, well, you can tell those guys I didn't come here to win 7 games. Mm-hmm. And it was the only time he sort of lifted his voice a little bit. Everything else, he was mild-mannered, Kelly, but that comment sort of rankled him that, I didn't come here to win 7. So I think that they are a good football team. I don't think certainly they can contend in the West with Alabama. I think A&M's got a better football team. But it is critical that they stay in Louisiana, for those opening games. And that big one against Florida State. And he's familiar with the talent. He's had to go up against Florida State at Notre Dame. And all I know is Mike Norvell's under as much pressure as he is. because if Mike don't win, I know who's taking over at Florida State next. So Brian's been through this, and he's talked about pressure, and he said, I haven't coached an SEC game, but he just sort of tongue-in-cheek said, I sort of know where I was before, what it is to deal with pressure. And, listen, you head coach at Notre Dame. It's been a long time since they won a national championship, and so he's felt that pressure to do it. They got a lot of talent on this football team that he inherited, but they're not real deep. And so he's going to have to play some younger players at some critical spots. And, again, the biggest position, if Jayden Daniels plays like he did in 2020, you got something there. But last year I thought he was highly erratic as a passer, and he wasn't certainly helped by a receiving corps at Arizona State that at times couldn't catch a cold if they were naked in Russia.
That's a new one right there, Mike. I'm going to have to borrow that. I will give you credit anytime I use it, but thank you for that little joke there. There is one storyline between Arkansas and LSU that we'll be following this season, and we'll worry about it when they play, but also they kind of executed a trade of sorts, defensive trade 2 for 2. You get Greg Brooks Jr., Joe Fouché at safety now for LSU, Landon Jackson at defensive end, Dwight McLaughlin, a cornerback for Arkansas. I'm not going to ask you who wins the trade because nobody's played a game yet, but I think there's a lot expected out of Landon Jackson for Arkansas. What do they get from him if he's healthy?
He's healthy. He's a long, lean athlete and get up the field. I know, and speaking to Coach O about him last spring and in the summer, he had told me, hey, listen, I think Landon's got a shot to start at Arkansas. He's really good. He said, listen, he just seen a lot of playing time had he stayed at LSU. So he's a really good athlete. You can see his explosiveness coming off the snap, his ability to get up the field, and he's got tremendous closing speed. So he's physically gotten stronger as a player, which he needed to. But he was a guy that I know the coaching staff from a year ago really talked highly of, and they thought he could contend to be a starter at LSU in 2022. Just that, he decided to move on. McLaughlin's the story, though, because I've had a lot of receivers that were either at LSU or still on the team point that finger and say that guy might be the best athlete we have here.
As far as
he's that talented,
Mike. As far as Brooks and Fouché are concerned, like these are veterans. They would have been leaders had they stayed at Arkansas, and obviously they found reason to go to LSU. Home would be one reason in Fouché's case. Are these expected to be leaders and top defensive players for LSU?
Both expected to be starters and in the nickel because, again, in college football, you play, I think the number last year, I got this from Durante Jones, who was LSU's former defensive coordinator. He said, we in the nickel 82% of the time. So both those guys, I think, will be starters. Both will be leaders. They're back in Louisiana. They both understand things really, really well on the type defense Brian Kelly wants. And he's going to lean on them because of the fact that most likely the two starting corners will have not played at LSU a year ago. And with Seven Banks, he's an Ohio State kid who's had a lot of knee injuries. They have a young man from McNeese who was a starter there, but he hasn't played at this level of competition. Gardner from University of Louisiana Raging Cajuns is also taken a step up. So they are important pieces of the puzzle, and they emerge quickly as two of the leaders on defense. No question about it.
Mike, you're good to join us, especially after breaking news just occurred.
I appreciate it, Mike.
LSU football. Thank you for your time, and thanks for that joke, man. Again, I'll let you know. I'll send something your way anytime I use it.
Hey, guys. Appreciate it, man.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate it, Mike.
Mike Detillier from WWL Radio. And he said, so he couldn't catch a cold if they were naked outside in Siberia. Is that what I heard?
I thought he said Russia, but same thing.
Siberia is the coldest part, I guess.
Of Russia,
At least that's sort of what they say. So the news is that Jayedn McDaniels will be the starting quarterback for LSU, transfer out of Arizona State. And Myles Brennan is leaving LSU football after 5 years, close to a 6th year. Daniels had a 17-2 touchdown interception ratio as a freshman. He's down to 10 touchdowns, 10 interceptions at Arizona State last year. But this guy can run a lot. Yeah, run a lot.
Online is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports, contests, and events with first-to-market odds and lines. Find reviews and news for every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports information, from live in-game betting, props, and futures. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to join today and make your first sports bet. Use our promo code BELIEVE50 to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. That's BELIEVE, BLEAV 50. That's BELIEVE, BLEAV 50. Bet online, where the game starts.